Welcome to Doctorates of the Absurd, your provider of belief on demand.
Today, we are undertaking a really critical deep dive. We're going to be peeling back the seamless, shiny veneer of our digital world to confront a massive hidden reality.
And what is that?
The shocking, truly massive material costs of our supposedly dematerialized lives.
It really is the ultimate existential itch of the 21st century, isn't it?
Look.
We live in this era that's just defined by speed and, ubiquity. Every email, every click, every trade. It's all supposed to be moving at the speed of light, completely liberated from physical constraints.
And that's the promise, right? That's the ultimate promise of the digital age, that this technology is inherently clean, it's inviolable, and therefore it must be sustainable.
Exactly. And that, for you, the listener, is the core tension we need to unpack today. That digital dream is confronting a brutal, inescapable physical reality.
It really is. Our sources confirm that this technological advancement, far from being environmentally friendly, is actually morphing into one of the greatest ecological threats we face. Right now, we've all bought into a grand illusion of immateriality.
And I think we have to start with the numbers because they're the first thing that really shatters that illusion. The stakes here are extraordinarily high, mostly because the scale of this problem is, well, it's just so often underestimated.
You're absolutely right. When we talk about global carbon footprints, we usually point the finger at, what, transportation? Heavy industry.
Sure, the usual suspects.
But consider this. The global digital industry's footprint is estimated to be 3 times larger than that of an entire developed nation. We're talking about a country the size of the United Kingdom.
Triple the UK. That's a scale that's difficult to even visualize. How does that break down into energy and emissions that we can actually grasp?
Well, it translates into a colossal strain on our global resources. Digital technologies currently consume 10% of the world's electricity.
10%.
10%. And maybe even more staggering, they account for close to 4% of global carbon dioxide emissions. Now, if you're tracking how we talk about environmental impact, you should note this. 4% of global CO2 is nearly double the emissions generated by the entire global civil aviation sector.
Wow. We spend so much time talking about reducing air travel, but the internet is this invisible, rapidly growing monster just consuming power in the background. So our mission today is to really understand and unpack this core binary, the digital dream, this idea of the immaterial and invisible versus the material reality, the physical, the polluting, and the intensely resource-intensive infrastructure.
We need to uncover the truth of how a simple saving a document in the cloud can so starkly confront us with our planet's finite physical and biological limits.
Okay, so where do we even begin to deconstruct an illusion that's this pervasive?
Well, to truly grasp this modern digital deception, we have to recognize that the pursuit of dematerialization isn't new. It's not unique to the internet era. It actually has a long philosophical and historical precedent.
Right. It's this centuries-old attempt to escape the confines of matter. I mean, you can think about the invention of writing itself. That was the first tool for dematerializing human presence, was it?
In what way?
A king could issue a precise, binding order without needing to physically be there to enforce it. The object, the presence, it became immaterial, but the meaning, the power, it remained.
And that idea just quickly permeated economics. When currency was invented, it symbolized the value of a product. Suddenly, physical goods, bushels of wheat, cuts of meat, they didn't just exist in relation to themselves, they exist in relation to their monetary value.
The material object was replaced by the symbolic dematerialized coin.
Exactly. And then the system evolved again. The Bill of Exchange, which was crucial for promoting international trade starting in the 15th century, well, it dematerialized the money itself. You weren't carrying sacks of gold anymore.
You were carrying a promise on a piece of paper.
So the source material makes this point so clearly. Dematerialization began well before the advent of computer technology. We replaced animal power with metal, metal with paper, and now paper with digital media.
But, and this is the critical part, the hidden mechanism we need to understand, the resource didn't actually disappear with each shift, did it?
Not at all. Instead, another resource, often a more resource-intensive one, was simply added to the complexity.
So that's the key idea. The supposed liberation from matter is a total fallacy. When we use the term dematerialization, we should really be using a much more cynical phrase.
Absolutely. As one specialist we reviewed put it, just so plainly, dematerializing means materializing in another way. And given our colossal need for complex composite material to design modern electronic equipment, well, computerization just dramatically confirms this mechanism.
So the digital age is not an age of subtraction. It's an age of compounding addition.
Precisely.
And this inherent deception leads us straight to the role of design and marketing. They are, effectively, the propagandists reinforcing this illusion of purity. Let's talk about sleekness as deception.
The aesthetic perfection of modern devices is absolutely designed to create an intuitive belief that the product is pure, that it's harmless. You have to look at Apple, the undisputed king of this aesthetic. Steve Jobs famously drew on the precepts of Zen Buddhism.
Right, simplicity, minimalism, asceticism.
All of it. And the result is these polished, minimalist devices. They're designed to feel intuitive and pure, what Jobs called aesthetically sublime. They're frictionless.
And who doesn't like frictionlessness?
Exactly. But this sophisticated simplicity serves a dual purpose. It feeds billions of consumers with the illusion that the digital world is harmless for the planet. The immense polluting complexity of the global supply chain, that material reality we just talked about, it's all completely hidden beneath this clean, smooth, recyclable-looking shell.
And then you have the language, the marketing vocabulary they use to, well, to sex up the digital world. Terms like dematerialized payments, holographic, virtual, and augmented reality, they all suggest a realm beyond physics.
But none is more deceiving than the cloud.
Ah, the cloud cloak. It's brilliant. It's designed to sound ethereal, woolly, floating harmlessly in the sky. We're told we store our documents in this supposedly dematerialized place.
But what we're actually doing is masking the intense physical architecture needed to store that data. We're talking about massive, energy-hungry data centers.
Huge steel and concrete warehouses.
Exactly. Warehouses that require enormous infrastructure, cooling systems, physical security, the works.
It really makes you realize how effective that marketing term is. If they called it the concrete slab full of zombie servers, no one would want to use it.
Precisely. And to truly quantify this physical burden, we have to move beyond the standard metric of CO2 emissions, which often only tracks the usage phase of a product. We need to introduce a more vital metric developed back in the 1990s,
MIPS. Okay, what is that?
It stands for Material Input Per Service Unit. This is really the toolkit for understanding the material problem.
I think MIPS is genius because it completely shifts the focus, doesn't it? We stop looking only at the environmental damage from what an object produces, like CO2 in the air, and we start factoring in everything that goes into producing the object and making it functional.
Right. It assesses all the resources mobilized and displaced globally for the manufacture, use, and recycling of any given item. That includes everything: the tons of earth moved, the water consumed, the chemicals used.
The land shifted, all of it.
Think of MIPS as the ecological rucksack of every product or action. It's the invisible weight you carry just by having or using an object. The concept is so dramatic, it was illustrated by this drawing that supposedly stopped a German researcher dead in his tracks.
What was it?
It was a man wearing a wedding band. But on his back is this enormous rucksack representing the true hidden material weight of that tiny little ring.
I mean, that analogy is just shocking. That tiny gold wedding band, just a few grams, has an MIPS of 3 tons of mobilized resources.
3 tons.
We rarely stop to think that the average hidden weight of all the objects surrounding us in our modern lives is 30 times their visible weight.
And this invisible weight translates directly into our digital actions, which just proves that digital is another form of material reality. For instance, a 1-kilometer car ride uses 1 kilogram of mobilized resources. Okay. Now look at digital. 1 minute on the telephone costs 300 grams of raw material mobilization.
300 grams for 1 minute of talking, and a text message, that tiny little whisper of data that we all assume is weightless.
That weighs 0.01 kilograms in raw materials mobilized, just for it to exist and be sent.
Now imagine multiplying that across every single click, every email, every stored photograph.
If you were to use one of the online MIPS calculators, you would find pretty quickly that the average ecological rucksack for a person in a developed nation is around 38 tons per year.
38 tons of earth, water, and chemicals displaced. All invisible, all necessary for our comfortable modern lives. That puts the digital illusion into a terrifying perspective. We believe we're being light and efficient, maybe working remotely to save gas, but we are constantly setting this planetary scale butterfly effect of material displacement into motion.
And that displacement is where the true material costs begin, which takes us right into the physical front lines of mining and manufacturing.
So if the digital world isn't floating harmlessly in the cloud, Where is the action really happening?
Well, we trace this pollution back to the physical front lines,
Yeah.
to extraction and fabrication.
And the single largest contributor to digital pollution isn't the data center we just talked about. That's the usage part. But it's the billions of personal interfaces we hold. Our smartphones, PCs, tablets, the devices themselves are the problem.
Absolutely. 80 to 90% of a smartphone's energy expenditure and material cost occurs during its complex manufacturing process, not during its relatively efficient usage phase.
So before it even gets to us.
Oh yeah, for a high-end device like the iPhone 12 Pro, that figure goes as high as 90% consumed before it even leaves the factory floor. This front line begins deep underground.
Just pull out your phone right now. You are holding a tiny, mobile, resource-intensive factory. This one device contains over 50 raw materials. We know about gold, lithium, and silicon, sure, but it's the obscure metals that really tell the story of this global complexity.
We're talking about things like neodymium, which is critical for making your phone vibrate, or indium tin oxide, ITO, a transparent, conductive material that's necessary for the touchscreen to work.
We walk around with this complex, globally sourced array of exotic elements in our pockets, and we're completely unaware of the resource scramble required just to produce one.
To illustrate the harsh, immediate reality of this mineral scramble, let's look at a specific case study, graphite mining in China, specifically in Heilongjiang province. This one province produces close to 70% of the world's graphite.
And graphite, of course, is indispensable for batteries, which means it's vital for our connected mobile lives.
And the mining process described in the sources it's just brutally destructive.
Yeah.
And shockingly antiquated, despite the high-tech application of the material.
The source describes excavators tearing down mountains, flattening them piece by piece, transporting the whitish rocks to these dilapidated factories.
Crushing them, immersing them in huge acid baths, and finally loading them into very high-temperature furnaces. The process leaves this gray powder that supposedly smells of rancid butter.
But the truly immediate and toxic fallout comes from the chemicals they use, doesn't it?
It does. That gray powder, the end product, contains hydrofluoric acid, a highly corrosive, extremely toxic, and potentially lethal solution.
And hydrofluoric acid is particularly frightening because it penetrates the skin so easily and rapidly. It attacks the calcium in your bones and causes systemic toxicity, often without any immediate pain, which can lead to devastating consequences.
And the people living nearby are forced to bear the cost. Farmers in the area, like one resident named Wei, they lament the consequences. He notes that the residue from the mines and factories spreads for dozens of kilometers,
destroying the local greenery, making the water completely murky, poisoning the very environment they rely on for their subsistence.
And the problem is just compounded by a shocking local governance failure. This strategic mining activity brings 1.5 billion euros annually into the province. It's politically protected.
So that importance leads to lax enforcement.
Oh, completely. They only maintain appearances by bringing a few model factories up to standard for an occasional official visit, while the vast majority just operate with impunity.
It's the classic story of institutional abandonment, isn't it? It's summarized perfectly by that local saying, "The mountains are high and the emperor is far."
The bosses make huge profits, and they simply don't care about the irreparable pollution that local residents are forced to live with. The money's just too important for the regional government to interfere.
And from these polluting mines, the materials then have to go to the next impossibly complex stage, microchip manufacturing, which introduces this bizarre clean room paradox.
This is where we see the intense pursuit of purity at a colossal material cost. These facilities, like the LEPI-CEA clean rooms in France, they have to maintain an environment that's infinitely more stringent than even the most sterile hospital operating theaters.
Why is that?
They require a zero-particle environment because even the smallest speck of dust, a single particle, can ruin the incredibly complex process of creating semiconductors. These are the brains of our devices. The air in these rooms has to be renewed every 6 seconds to ensure that level of cleanliness.
And the complexity and scale of this product they're truly astronomical. A modern smartphone chip is 1,000 times more powerful than the best computer from 30 years ago.
And printing these integrated circuits involves 60 different raw materials and over 1,000 separate steps. A single chip can contain 50 billion transistors.
50 billion.
Yeah.
To put that in perspective, that's 4 times the number of stars in our Milky Way galaxy, all studded onto a surface the size of a postage stamp.
The logistics chain required for this perfection is the ultimate representation of globalization. You have quartz from South Africa, silicon wafers from Japan, highly specialized photolithography equipment from the Netherlands.
Vacuum pumps from Austria, integrated circuits packaged in Vietnam, and then finally shipped to assembly centers like Foxconn in China. That movement alone has to consume a monstrous amount of energy.
But the material cost isn't just energy and logistics. It's also this profound water crisis, epitomized by companies like TSMC, the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company.
What's their story?
Chip production requires exorbitant amounts of ultra-pure deionized water at virtually every stage of the manufacturing process. This water has to be purer than distilled water. All the ions have to be removed because any impurity would disrupt the delicate chemical process on the nanoscale.
And the volume must be terrifying.
TSMC's facilities in Taiwan alone consume 150,000 tons of water per day. During the 2021 drought, the water needs were so great that the government had to send convoys of trucks carrying water to the Hsinchu Science Park, which created massive traffic jams.
So the electronics industry's thirst is now directly competing with agricultural and residential needs.
Directly. And we haven't even discussed the chemical emissions from fabrication yet. There's the fluorinated gases threat.
F-gases.
Right. HFCs, SF6, PFCs. These are potent greenhouse gases used both for cooling data centers, we'll come back to that, and for specific etching processes in microchip manufacturing because of their inert chemical properties.
The sources refer to them as the worst greenhouse gases you've never heard of, and for good reason, right?
Exactly. They are up to 23,500 times more potent than CO2 when it comes to trapping heat in the atmosphere. They don't destroy the ozone layer, which is why they were initially celebrated as a replacement for CFCs decades ago, but they constitute a clear ecological time bomb.
And even though F-gases account for only about 1% of total global greenhouse gas emissions right now, their warming potential is immense and long-lasting.
This unintended consequence has forced the international community to act, which resulted in the Kigali Amendment, aiming for their progressive phase-out.
But even that phase-out is highly complex and geopolitical, isn't it?
It is. China and India, two of the biggest producers and consumers of F-gases, were granted these long grace periods to phase them out, starting only in 2029 and 2032, respectively.
Why the delay?
Well, this delay highlights a deeper corporate interest. It's partly attributed to the powerful lobbying of the U.S. company Honeywell. Honeywell developed a less harmful alternative HFO gases, but they patented the technology until 2035 and sold it at 20 times the price of the older HFCs.
So it's a classic case of profit winning over planetary health.
Absolutely. As one activist noted, the corporation is so powerful it can dictate government action, protecting its industry by delaying the uptake of cheaper, natural refrigerants that lack intellectual property rights, which just drags the solution out for decades.
So we've traced the massive physical costs of the hardware, the devices, and the chips. Now we pivot to the invisible infrastructure that makes them talk, the cloud.
And this entire structure is built on an insatiable, almost psychotic demand for immediacy.
You mean uptime?
Yes. Cloud companies operate on a quest for absolute availability. They demand what's known as 5 nines uptime, 99.999% reliability.
Which means less than 24 minutes of total downtime per year.
24 minutes. Why this obsession? Because the fallout from a failure is massive and immediate. We've seen examples like when a British Airways data center crashed, it grounded 75,000 passengers and cost the company hundreds of millions of dollars.
The entire global economy relies on this constant, uninterrupted availability.
And we, the users, we bear some responsibility for setting this impossible bar. The industry is responding to our expectation of instant gratification. Our sources argue that we are behaving like spoiled little brats who expect the internet to work faster and faster.
And that pressure translates directly into an architecture of systemic waste within those data centers.
That's where the redundancy comes in. To guarantee that absolute availability, data centers need literal, physical duplication of everything.
So what does that look like in practice?
Well, think about the infrastructure. They need 2 separate electrical supplies, 2 diesel generators, and these vast rooms, sometimes the size of public libraries, filled with lead-acid batteries.
Just to cover the switchover.
Exactly. These batteries ensure continuity just for the few seconds it takes for the generators to start up after a main power failure. These basements are infrastructural labyrinths, loaded with cables and fuel oil tanks holding hundreds of thousands of liters, ready for anything.
And the data itself is physically duplicated, right? We know that Gmail replicates every email 6 times across various servers globally.
And there's even an unverified rumor of a major financial institution replicating its high-frequency trading data 15 times just to guarantee no loss of milliseconds or accuracy.
So this extreme redundancy means the industry is permanently haunted by zombie servers.
It is. Industry experts estimate that as much as 20% of a company's material servers and networking equipment sits around, powered on and consuming electricity, but doing absolutely nothing, just waiting for a potential traffic peak or a catastrophic failure.
And beyond the zombie servers, they also massively oversize their infrastructure for cooling and power delivery to anticipate those peaks.
Which means, consequently, that underused data centers can waste up to 90% of the total electricity they consume. Imagine a city where 90% of its streetlights are always on, but only 10% are actually needed most of the time.
That is the architecture of waste built into the cloud.
And this waste brings us back to the dirty power source. Where is all this redundant capacity and constant energy burn fueled? In the United States, one of the biggest concentrations of data centers, the true engine room of the internet, is in Ashburn County, Virginia.
Right, and this region used to source its electricity heavily from Appalachian coal mines via companies like Dominion Energy.
And the source details the catastrophic environmental costs of this coal. Dominion historically obtained coal extracted using a practice called mountaintop removal.
This is not traditional underground mining. It's an industrial-scale ecological catastrophe. It's a process where explosives literally flatten mountains by 50 meters or more, removing the entire peak just to extract coal cheaply and quickly.
And the long-term damage is staggering. It causes significant biodiversity loss, the destruction of vast networks of streams and waterways, and acute water contamination that can persist for 30 years or more.
And the geomorphology impacts, the physical changing of the shape of the land, can last for thousands of years. We are altering the ancient structure of the Appalachians just to power instant data access.
And the FAA's complicity here is startling. Large corporations like AWS and Netflix rely heavily on this coal-based power mix. For AWS, in certain regions, up to 50% of their electricity has been sourced from coal.
But they publicly claim carbon neutrality.
They do, using carbon credits, buying paper documentation from green energy producers. But the practical reality is different.
And the utility companies actively fight the transition. Dominion Energy, the utility responsible for power in that Virginia hub, has paid millions lobbying Virginia officials to delay the clean energy transition, ensuring that cheap, polluting coal continues to fuel the cloud.
These powerful companies claim green credentials, but their immediate power supplier is fighting tooth and nail against sustainable change.
This leads to that classic dilemma of the green facade versus the material trade-offs. Companies often migrate to locations like Luleå, Sweden, up in the far north.
Right. Facebook, for instance, was drawn there by two things: incredibly cheap, supposedly green, hydroelectric power, and the natural cold down to minus 30 degrees Celsius for cooling its massive data center.
On paper, this sounds like a brilliant, sustainable solution. Cold climate, renewable energy. What's the problem?
The problem is the unacknowledged tragedy inherent in that green power source. The hydroelectric power relies on the Luleå River, which was dammed decades ago. And local residents describe this damming, which created the energy supply, as a massacre of the environment and a dead river.
This causes profound, ineffable grief and long-lasting mourning among locals who only broke their silence about it in the 1990s. They see a dead waterway where a vibrant ecosystem once existed.
So this illustrates a crucial ethical point for us to consider. A company's clean, green image can be entirely propped up by long-standing ecological damage. Facebook isn't responsible for the historical dam, no, but it perpetuates the need for that power facility, while the power source itself has this massive acknowledged impact on local biodiversity.
The label green becomes a geographical shell game.
Exactly. And the geopolitics of this growth are causing a severe real-world pushback. Cities are reaching their power limits. Dublin, for example, which hosts massive operations for Google, Apple, Microsoft, and Facebook, is now seeing data centers consume more energy than the city's entire population.
And the estimates are alarming, aren't they?
They are. Data centers in Ireland could consume 30% of the national electricity by 2030, despite the government's aggressive attempts to ramp up renewable energy capacity.
So this massive energy draw creates a critical infrastructure constraint, forcing cities like Amsterdam and Dublin to actively push back against the industry's expansion. And it raises the very real risk of power outages for their general populations.
The core problem remains. The digital geography is defined by urgency and impatience, condemning the industry to a perpetual, unsustainable quest for performance and immediacy, regardless of the planetary cost.
Okay, now we need to discuss the core mechanism that's accelerating this problem across all sectors.
Okay.
The rebound effect.
Yes. This is the phenomenon where the efficiency gains that we celebrate, say a 30% reduction in resource use per unit, are entirely swallowed, and then some, by a massive increase in total consumption volume.
We see this pattern everywhere in industrial history, don't we?
Yeah.
Internal combustion engine cars, for example. They became about 30% more fuel efficient over time, which sounds great. But at the same time, new car sales and usage rose by 50%. So the net environmental impact still grew.
Similarly, global aviation emissions jumped 80% between 1970 and 2017, despite impressive efficiency improvements in aircraft design and engine technology. We achieve great technical efficiency, and then we just apply that efficiency to a vastly larger volume of activity.
And the digital realm acts as a super catalyst for this rebound. Digital technology enables this astounding economic and social acceleration, instant high-frequency trading on the stock market, rapid e-commerce ordering, ubiquitous entertainment.
Digital allows us to organize, communicate, and transact things much faster and easier than ever before. This effectively accelerates consumption across the entire economy, indirectly increasing overall resource use. As analysts concluded after studying hundreds of inventions since the 1950s, none resulted in a net decrease in total resource consumption once fully integrated into the global economy.
And this is exactly what we need to keep in mind as we look toward the supposed next frontier, 5G and the Internet of Everything, or IoT.
Right. 5G promises 10 times faster speeds, allowing a 2-hour film to be downloaded in under 10 seconds. But here's a critical question the sources raise. Who actually needs that speed? Who needs that lightning-fast connection for checking an email, loading a holiday photo, or streaming a standard-definition video?
It's fascinating. When engineers and technicians were pressed to identify what immediate consumer applications would actually need 5G, many were reportedly stumped. Their response was often, "We don't see where there's a massive market for it today."
This reveals that the rollout is heavily geopolitical. It's driven by the global competition between China and Huawei against Western technological dominance, rather than actual consumer need or environmental assessment. It's a push for global infrastructural control.
And the physical cost of this rapid 5G deployment is immense because 5G's high-frequency signals have limited range and struggle to penetrate buildings. Deploying it requires installing twice as many antennas, hundreds of thousands of them.
Sometimes every 100 meters on streetlights and bus stops. And each of these new antennas is laden with rare metals, like scandium and gallium. And that's just the wireless side.
What about the wired infrastructure?
The wired infrastructure needed to relay all this exponentially increasing data requires pulling millions of kilometers of new wired fiber, an estimated 40 times the circumference of the Earth, just to cover the top 50 U.S. metro markets.
And the most shocking omission in this global push: no comprehensive environmental impact assessments were carried out before this massive technological enterprise began.
It was a global premise of zero precautions, just moving forward with the technological imperative regardless of the material cost.
And this massive infrastructure expansion, both wired and wireless, is fueled by one commodity: data hoarding.
Right. The new masters of the internet no longer thrive on selling just hardware or software, but on commercializing information. They draw us in with supposedly free services to keep siphoning more and more of our data.
Let's look at the highly specific and alarming e-scooter surveillance case. Companies like Lime & Bird offer what appears to be a basic, fun, free mobility service, but their primary goal is to acquire critical data mass.
When you create an account, you hand over your name, your banking details, your payments history. Then, the integrated sensors on the e-scooters and the app continuously collect highly sensitive mobility data.
Your precise routes, the church you visit, the protest march you attended, the medical appointments you keep.
Even the location of your home address. This mobility data is rightly classified by experts as among the most sensitive data there is. Yet users unknowingly consent to data sharing with third parties for research, business, or other purposes. It's buried deep in unintelligible terms and conditions.
And this fuels the $300 billion data broker market, where companies combine this mobility data with other demographic information to complete these incredibly detailed, intimate profiles of consumers.
The ACLU warns that these innocuous-looking e-scooters are, in reality, two-wheeled data hoarding devices.
And this mass data collection has serious real-world sociopolitical consequences that move beyond just marketing, doesn't it? We've seen the connection to government surveillance.
Oh, yes. The Trump administration, for example, used this kind of phone location data, often aggregated by data brokers, to prosecute illegal immigrants and track activists. Companies have admitted they send user information to governments if they feel legally or otherwise obliged to do so.
The sources argue that systems like the Chinese social credit system are simply a slightly more obvious, centralized transcription of the data hoarding and constant behavioral profiling that we already accept and encourage in the West.
The principle of constant surveillance is already built into the business model.
And finally, we have to discuss how this exponential system captures the most finite resource of all, our attention. This is the science of captology, or the manipulation matrix.
Developers use these carefully designed sequences of triggers, actions, and rewards to make users consult their phones on average no less than 150 times a day. It feeds that addictive, instant dopamine feedback loop.
And the immediate battleground for this constant engagement is pure psychology and color. Developers use A/B testing, constantly tweaking small variables, to identify the optimal colors for click capture and user fidelity.
For instance, there was a subtle discovery years ago about the optimal shade of dark blue hex number 0000CC, used for hyperlinks by Google and Bing. Researchers found that by optimizing just this color to maximize user interaction, it could generate up to $200 million in additional annual profit.
Just from one shade of blue.
Just from getting the blue right. But red is the color that truly dominates the attention economy. Why? Because it is the most eye-catching of primary colors, and it's the one least frequently found in nature. We are socially and biologically conditioned to react to red as an alert, a warning, a signal demanding immediate attention.
And the data bears that out.
Studies repeatedly showed that simply changing a button color to red increased user engagement by 20% compared to green. That psychological leverage is just too valuable to ignore.
Which is why Apple, Facebook, and Netflix all use red for their notification bubbles. It stimulates dopamine release, pushing us to check our phones repeatedly. It's a biological mechanism hijacked for profit.
As one neurobiologist noted, programmers are working very hard behind those clean screens to keep you doing exactly that. We're being hacked on a psychological level, and we're voluntarily giving them permission to do it, making us scarcely more autonomous than the rodents in laboratory tests who constantly press a lever for a reward.
So the digital industry's control mechanism extends beyond just our attention and data. It's deeply embedded into the very lifespan of our devices through the calculated and cynical practice of planned obsolescence.
And the shocking denial of ownership.
Right. And there are three distinct forms of obsolescence working in tandem to keep that consumption cycle spinning. First, you have material obsolescence, which is the most obvious.
That's where a component, usually the battery, is deliberately glued fast to the rest of the device, making replacement impossible without professional, expensive tools. This forces the entire smartphone or tablet onto the scrap heap simply because of a single, cheap, worn-out part.
Then there's cultural obsolescence, which is all psychological. A perfectly functioning earlier technology becomes socially undesirable with the release of a new, faster, marginally different model.
We are just convinced by the continuous marketing cycle that our current device is somehow inadequate, fueling an unnecessary replacement market.
And finally, the most frustrating one is software obsolescence. This happens when updates to operating systems or apps deliberately render old devices incompatible. The classic example is Sonos, right?
Yes. Sonos announced that speakers sold between 2005 and 2015 would no longer work properly because they wouldn't receive further system updates. As one campaigner rightly fumed, manufacturers are effectively taking a speaker that's in perfect working order and just throwing it into the bin.
But the most insidious form of control is what you mentioned, the software lock. The fundamental denial of ownership.
When you buy a smartphone, you technically own the physical casing and the glass, but you only hold a license to use the operating system software that makes it functional. You don't have the legal right to inspect or modify that software.
And that analogy in the sources is striking and deeply concerning for long-term liberty. This is exactly how massive companies like John Deere prevent their customers from repairing their own tractors.
Even though the farmers own the hardware.
Exactly. Because any necessary repair requires altering John Deere's proprietary software, which is licensed, not owned.
And we can trace this proprietary strategy even further back to companies like Monsanto, who perfected the model by forcing Indian farmers, who only held a license to its patented seeds, to buy new ones annually, instead of having the traditional right to replant saved seeds.
So if we accept the software lock on our personal devices, we risk becoming like those Indian farmers, with our right to genuine independent ownership just systematically restricted?
But there is resistance. A counter-movement is fighting for an alternative digital world, one built on durability and open knowledge.
Absolutely. This resistance manifests in grassroots movements like repair cafes, where volunteers help fix broken electronics, collectively avoiding an estimated 400 tons of e-waste annually.
We also see makers and fab labs championing the philosophy. If you want to know how something works, make it yourself. They are democratizing knowledge and repair.
And this resistance is finally moving into policy. France, for example, introduced a compulsory repairability index in 2021. It forces manufacturers to inform consumers of the durability and ease of repair of electronic tools before they purchase.
That puts necessary pressure on the material obsolescence model. And companies like Fairphone are designing and selling sustainable modular phones meant to last 7 to 8 years, with easily replaceable batteries and screens. They actively fight to keep new Android versions compatible with older models.
Which demonstrates that durable design is technologically feasible. It's just not profitable for the dominant players.
For you, the listener, we can also practice what's called digital sobriety. There are concrete, simple actions that reduce our material footprint immediately. For example, always watch videos using Wi-Fi. It's 23 times less energy intensive than 4G mobile data.
And if you don't need crystal clarity, stream video in low definition. That consumes 4 to 10 times less energy than high definition.
Also, choosing privacy-respecting platforms like DuckDuckGo or Signal limits the immense data harvesting, which is itself an extremely energy-intensive process that we talked about earlier.
And my personal favorite, the grayscale rebellion. Switching your smartphone screen to black and white is a simple practice that short-circuits the psychological manipulation caused by those highly stimulating red and blue notifications, those attention magnets.
Even Apple introduced a feature back in 2017 allowing users to switch their iPhone display to grayscale, acknowledging the mental health and attention benefits.
Okay, now let's pivot away from our personal interfaces and back to the physical infrastructure we rarely, if ever, see, the critical backbone of the internet.
The physical underworld of undersea cables.
Most users still operate under the complete illusion that their data flies effortlessly overhead via satellites.
And that is the ultimate illusion of the internet. In reality, close to 99% of the world's data travels via 1.2 million kilometers of submarine fiber optic cables. This massive amphibious network crisscrosses abysses, traverses straits, and connects every continent except Antarctica.
And the pace of this deployment is driven by an almost absurd quest for latency, the speed of connection. It is purely a race against time.
Consider the $300 million Hibernia Express cable. It was built purely to shave a few milliseconds off the New York-London stock market connection. For high-frequency trading companies, the bat of an eye, 400 milliseconds, is literally an eternity.
They gain immense competitive advantage by routing cables along slightly straighter, slightly faster paths to gain those tiny fractions of a second over their rivals.
And this critical infrastructure is now a point of intense geopolitical tension. It reflects the modern battle for informational control. For instance, the future Blue Ramen cable, co-owned by Google, is strategically planned to bypass the Suez Canal entirely.
Why bypass the canal?
To diversify data transmission routing away from Egypt, which charges hefty tolls for landline crossings and presents a potential bottleneck. In a similar vein, the Europe-Persia Express gateway cable will deliberately pass through Iran, which just indicates the complex geopolitical maneuvers required to guarantee diverse, reliable connections.
And geopolitics also drives the quest for new, difficult routes, particularly the Arctic highways.
Yes, companies like Russia's Polarnet and Finland's Sinia are actively pursuing cables through the Northeast Passage. These new routes aim to link London and Europe directly to Tokyo and China, capitalizing on melting ice caps to shorten travel time.
So this represents the ecolonization of the Arctic. It puts remote regions like Kirkenes in Norway suddenly on the radar for massive new data centers, increasing infrastructural exposure in a region that is ecologically fragile and increasingly accessible due to climate change.
And meanwhile, China is simultaneously paving its digital Silk Road. This is a huge state-backed project to construct fiber optic infrastructure globally, not just to expand the economic interests of its BTX companies, Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, Xiaomi,
but crucially, to counter what it sees as the West's intolerable network hegemony. China views the struggle for information dominance as key to its long-term national security.
And despite this immense strategic importance, this critical grid is surprisingly, even alarmingly fragile. Around 200 cases of cable damage are reported annually. And what's the number one cause?
Not sabotage.
Nope. Fishing trawler anchors, ahead of natural threats like earthquakes.
The 2006 Taiwan earthquake is a famous example. It severed multiple cables in the Luzon Strait, taking 20 agonizing days to fully restore connectivity to Southeast Asia. The economic and social fallout of that event was immediate and severe.
Because of this constant vulnerability, specialized ocean emergency brigades with custom ships are constantly deployed to repair cables, often requiring grappling hooks to locate the tiny fiber lines in the abyss. If these cable ships weren't constantly patching up damage, experts estimate the world's internet would be down in barely a few months.
Yet, despite the strategic criticality of this global infrastructure, the entire industry is almost entirely privatized and dependent on a small number of financially fragile suppliers.
And this situation leaves governments subordinate to powerful private conglomerates whose primary interests, latency gains for high-frequency trading, do not always align with national security or global stability.
So we have completed the deep dive. We've traced the journey of a simple like on your screen, from the Zen-like minimalism of its design, through the polluted graphite mines of Heilongjiang and the water-hungry clean rooms of Taiwan,
Past the oversaturated coal-powered data centers of Virginia, and finally across the fragile geopolitical cables beneath the Arctic and Atlantic Oceans.
And the central argument that emerges from tracing this material reality is this: the true ultimate limits of the internet will not be technical.
No. Engineers will always find a way to increase capacity, reduce volume, and shave off milliseconds, whether through quantum computing or DNA storage. The technological imperative will always find a solution.
No, the limits will be sociopolitical and moral. They will be imposed by our human values, the values we place on protecting our mental health, our privacy, our democracy, and the integrity of the environment we all rely on.
We have reached a critical inflection point, and this returns to that final provocative thought. We have entered a paradigm where the challenges of a world drugged on digital abundance are now more colossal and complex than those of a world enslaved to material scarcity.
The sheer volume of waste zombie servers, data brokers, endless mining is overwhelming the gains of efficiency.
Accumulating is in the process of becoming more lethal than lacking. The choice is now laid bare before you: the accelerating power of technology versus the claimed wisdom of its use. We are all cohabitants of this massive, fragile, physical-digital infrastructure, whether we realize it or not.
You must now decide. Will you continue to be an indifferent cohabitant, passively accepting the hidden costs of convenience? Or will you demand that our collective knowledge about this massive material reality leads to genuine, sustainable change?
The decision starts with realizing that this new medium is not pure, it's not invisible, and it is actively reprogramming us, one invisible, resource-heavy click at a time.